Hey, Carl. Actually, I want you to try to find a manual for my hotspot. You got something to write with. Or if you want to put it on your iPad, I'll give you the model number. I can't get online here for some reason. I'm trying to get this to run so I'm a secure network. It won't do it. It's locked up. It won't do anything. And I've been needing a manual. It's a Netgear hotspot. It's model Unite, like United without the D. Unite dash 9.
United.
It's Unite. UNITE dash 9. D David 7A Adam. So it's model Unite 9D7A. If I can just get the PDF, look, back in Texas. If I can just get the PDF for send it to Texas Randy, that'd be great. I was a little reluctant to take my personal computer with all my personal information on an open network. If they have a network, you have to have a password. Well, see if you can find that. I need that anyways. Well,
hey, good to see you. Oh, yeah.
real inclusive.
a hearing on something else. Yeah, this is so it's not.
I didn't understand it was going to be this big a deal.
It's geared toward the it's the trafficking in the United States. Basically, it's
They have to do a paper, or they're on the staff.
Where's my statement?
And this is just following through when I've written in.
But where's my information that I had here?
On which one?
She moved.
The list
Yeah, all
you're just
right,
going
she's a
through?
little worried about that. Shut the phone, right?
No, the statement that I was marking up this morning.
By when? Right. Thank you.
Brenda's 37th wedding anniversary. So I didn't do that. I need to do that.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
That I don't understand. Where's page 1 of
Hey, that's what this is all about.
You're wanting to,
my original statement that I had worked up?
well, this is.
I know this is what you
You
want.
want the.
I want this back. It
talking
was
point?
right here.
When you do this,
Good. That's fine. Good.
This is the front page.
No, I
Marked it up?
They're the State Department. Yeah, it's Cabeza. State Department computer comes in hearing. It versions me, so we go through hearing and stuff.
Right.
So my family has successfully had this name for a long time. And the State Department changed the way to do it. If I
Where's the comment about California's new act and all the prosecutions we're getting into? All the stuff that I had in the
exactly.
We heard you can't turn them off.
Is it time right now to call it the board? Looks pretty good to me.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful campus. I love this campus.
that point, I'm sure the
They
chairman.
were
Yeah.
so amazing. Hi. How are you? No, there was. And she asked me a question, and I actually really was like smiling because I thought it was you. I didn't think it was going to work. Oh my gosh. It was how much. Yeah. So anyway, like, it was a great one. I thought it was you. It was.
Whatever you say.
Oh yeah.
This hearing will come to order at this time. I'm going to ask everyone if you could find a seat, and we will begin on our human trafficking field hearing. Let me also say that we're pleased to be joined today by a number of organizations here in Orange County that have been very involved with a task force that I put together some time ago in order to try to bring organizations in the community together with law enforcement and some representation from the bench to try to come up with some solutions to the trafficking problems. But at this time, we'll just mention that we have some people in the audience who will go nameless with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, but we appreciate their good service. But some of the others I'm going to ask to stand for a minute and be recognized. Bob Smith with FACES, Cheryl Petluck from Vineyard, Anaheim, Human Trafficking Ministry, Chris Bauer, Saddleback Justice and Trafficking Initiative, Claude Arnold, Special Agent in Charge with ICE, Guido Hygienius with I Emphasize, Jeanette Kreitner with Grandma's House of Hope, Joyce Capel with Crittenden Services, Children and Families, been around since the 1880s, helping girls, Kimberly Yem, San Clemente Abolitionist, Lee Dundas with A21 Project, Lynn Tran of the Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force, Margie Iacovoti, Zoe Children's Home, Paula Daniels, Forgotten Children, Chief Paul Kazita, Anaheim PD, Sandra Morgan, Global Center for Women and Justice, Sherry Harris from the Salvation Army, their network that works with human trafficking, Stephanie Polero and Wendy Daly, co-founders of International Sanctuary. We thank them for their help on the legislation that we have authored. And I also thank my colleagues, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, for their trip out here to California. But we must thank California State University Fullerton, my alma mater, here today as well for making this venue possible. And our acting ranking member, Congresswoman Karen Bass. Many of you know that she's the former Speaker here in the Assembly in California. She's been a leader on this issue, and we are working with her on this bipartisan legislation. We appreciate her trip out here. Randy Weber, we appreciate you coming all the way from Texas. Dana Rohrabacher, Congressman, we appreciate you and all your work as well.
All the way from Costa Mesa.
All the way from Costa Mesa. And Alan Lowenthal will be here shortly all the way from Long Beach. So, but I am proud, I must say, of the work the Foreign Affairs Committee has done over the years, and all of these members serve on the committee with me, on human trafficking. In 2000, our committee put forward legislation that was focused on what we could do to force other countries around the world to put in place standards and to start to combat human trafficking. The consequence of that legislation is that we now have 130 countries around the world over that period of time that have strengthened laws on their books. And the reason they do it is a simple one. They try to stay out of the report that the State Department now does every year that shames them for their failure to comply with efforts to try to stop the trafficking of underage girls and try to stop the trafficking with respect to labor trafficking. And so we have these tier rankings that we do. And part of our efforts in Congress have been to increase the pressure, increase the standards, and as we're traveling, meeting with foreign heads of state, this does come up. This does come up. They complain about the report, but they try to comply with it. And we think that continued vigilance is what's called for on that front. We appreciate that our top point person in the world, who has the role of traveling and is headed to Algeria a little later after his appearance here in California, but he is Ambassador C. DeBaca, and many of you know he has had a rather prominent role in forcing this issue internationally, and we're pleased that he's with us today. Thank you, Ambassador. Trafficking is a global problem, but unfortunately for us, it's not a faraway problem. And I mentioned here in Orange County some of the statistics, some of the things that the District Attorney's Office has shared with me. We have had a doubling of trafficking in underage girls every year for the last 3 years that that those working in community-based organizations offering services have noticed in the community. And it is because of the expertise established by some of these criminal syndicates in the use, for example, of Romeos to find underage girls, to find a girl maybe 14 years old, convince them to leave her state, come to California, leave her ties with her family, and then begin the process of moving in with them, and before they know it, they're being trafficked, beaten and trafficked. And as the district attorney will tell you, it is those beatings which establishes something of a Stockholm Syndrome type situation, where that child is now afraid to testify against the individual who has done it, and now he sells her into a criminal syndicate that deals in these underage girls. We especially appreciate the work of the police departments, including the Anaheim PD, that are represented here today, in their efforts across this county and in Southern California to try to prosecute. And for that reason, many of the organizations that we mentioned here today were involved in the passage of a statewide initiative in California, a statewide proposition, which went into effect this year. And as a result of that law, we have our first conviction of an individual who was trafficking underage girls from, in this case, he had taken her from Bakersfield to Sacramento, a 13-year-old, and he received, as I recall, some 32 years in prison for that act. This new legislation has teeth, but in talking to the prosecutors, what they say is they also need additional legislation, not only to attack the problem of trafficked underage girls and labor trafficking out of countries in the United States, and we have legislation to do that, but also additional legislation to try to make it easier for prosecutions to go forward by creating an environment for underage girls especially to have an element of safety and be able to come forward and testify. So we're going to discuss some of those issues. But we held a committee hearing in May on this issue and had one of the supervisors from Los Angeles County, Don Kanabe, tell about his experiences and the discovery that girls 10, 12 years old were being trafficked in Los Angeles County and some of the steps that the county took. Well, going forward, we want to build on that work. The Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force has assisted 250 victims. 93% of them are women. 80 of them were from foreign countries. A third of them are recruited in foreign countries by unscrupulous labor recruiters. Our legislation, the legislation that I've introduced, the Fraudulent Overseas Recruitment and Trafficking Elimination Act, requires that foreign workers be given accurate information about the terms of employment and anti-trafficking protections under U.S. law. It prohibits recruitment fees or hidden charges used as coercive leverage over workers. No longer can you get them into debt bondage. It requires the foreign labor recruiters to register. They've got to remain in good standing with the Department of Labor. Why do all of this? Because it gives us a ground for prosecution when people are involved in bringing trafficking into the United States. And it provides new incentives for law enforcement to ensure that recruiters and employers follow under a series of penalties, fees, and consequences. So I look forward to the input from our expert testimony here today. And as my chief of staff can tell you, based on her volunteer work with underage girls trafficked in India and in Cambodia, and there the average age when girls are trafficked is 11. She says, you don't see the harm of human trafficking most clearly in numbers or statistics. You see it in the eyes of the individual person whose life is being stolen and whose dignity is being assaulted for the profit of someone else. We'll hear today, thankfully, that in Southern California, some of our organizations are on the cutting edge to fight trafficking and rescue and protect victims. And I want to thank our witnesses, but especially in closing, I want to thank our courageous survivors who will testify for being here to share their insights, share their expertise with our committee, and your message will be heard loud and wide and certainly taken back to Washington, D.C. We'll now go to Congresswoman Karen Bass from Los Angeles.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I want to thank Chairman Royce for convening this hearing, and in general, for his leadership on the Foreign Affairs Committee, as well as his commitment to eradicating human trafficking. I know he is your congressional representative, but you should know that all of us are very honored to serve under his leadership on the committee. Although trafficking impacts every country across the globe, it is far too often unspoken and in the shadows. It's my hope that today's hearing will shed light on both the global statistics as well as the local trends right here in Southern California. By learning more about the regional strategies utilized to stop this exploitation, we will surely be better prepared to strengthen our prevention, protection, and prosecution efforts, both here at home and abroad. I look forward to sharing the solutions discussed here today with our colleagues back in Washington. In 2012, according to the International Labor Organization, nearly 21 million individuals worldwide were subjected to conditions of human trafficking. Unfortunately, the U.S. is not immune to this problem. The State Department's Trafficking in Persons report outlines that the U.S. is a source, transit, and destination country for labor and sex trafficking of men, women, and children. While the assessment has been helpful in highlighting certain types of trafficking, it does not include alarming data recently reported about the domestic minor victims. In 2013, 60% of the child sex trafficking victims recovered as part of an FBI nationwide raid from over 70 cities were children from foster care or group homes. This issue is very close to me personally because it greatly impacts Los Angeles and our nation's foster youth, a vulnerable yet resilient population that we remove from their homes and we pledge to keep them safe. In fact, in Los Angeles County alone, hundreds of youth are commercially exploited each year. In 2012, in Los Angeles, 78% of the girls identified as victims of trafficking were current or former foster youth. Despite these statistics, few child welfare employees have been adequately trained or prepared to respond to child victims of trafficking, and fewer still have incorporated policies, protocols, and case management techniques to serve this population appropriately. It's absolutely unacceptable to allow the continued victimization and abuse of a population that we have vowed to care for and protect. That's why my fellow colleague on the Foreign Affairs Committee and co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth, Representative Tom Marino, and I have introduced the Child Welfare Response to Trafficking Act. Our bill would do three things. It would ensure that child welfare agencies create plans to prevent the exploitation and provide appropriate services to victims. It would create a best practices toolkit for child welfare agencies, and it would provide accurate state-by-state and national statistics in a comprehensive report to Congress. As federal legislators, we have a tremendous opportunity to ensure that local plans to prevent exploitation are in place, as well as collect the necessary national data to inform future federal strategies. While many of the social services needed to properly serve trafficked youth may require a monetary investment, these first steps do not require additional federal funding. But congressional action is not enough. We must undertake a whole of society and whole of government approach that works to ensure that the safety and dignity of trafficking victims and acknowledges that human trafficking affects U.S. citizens and foreign nationals, as well as millions of adults and children, men and women worldwide. I look forward to hearing your testimony today, and I, along with my colleague, really want to thank you for being willing to come forward and share your stories. I know that that might be painful, but it's just extremely important that people understand exactly what happens and how we need to help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congresswoman Bass. Randy Weber came all the way from Texas for today's hearing. He serves as vice chair of the subcommittee dealing with global human rights, and his commitment to these issues extend back to his days in the Texas legislature, where he authored landmark legislation there to combat human trafficking and to protect trafficking victims.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start out by thanking you for calling this important hearing and my colleagues for taking out the time to come all the way from California, which is a little bit closer than Texas, I'll tell you. I frequently joke as I leave D.C. To go back to my home state of Texas that I'm returning to the land of sanity. And yet there's some real truth to that. I think it's important that we leave the Beltway behind and all the politics, and we come back into the trenches to actually hear from those who are dealing with these treacherous realities of life, as some of our witnesses have been through firsthand. And again, I want to echo my colleagues' comments saying thank you for being willing to come and share your story. We need to be back in the land of reality, as I call it, to hear these kinds of stories and to deal with these kinds of atrocities. And so that when we go back to D.C., we realize how our decisions impact those who are out in the real world, as I like to call it, how our decisions affect those, or sometimes it's the decisions that we don't make, Mr. Chairman, the things that we won't take up and that we won't address. So I think it's important that we come back and we come to these kinds of events and we learn from those who are here on the ground. Mr. Chairman, you alluded to the journey I started nearly 5 years ago in the Texas legislature, when I got involved in human trafficking issues, and at that time I had absolutely no idea of the prevalence of participation in the industry, the magnitude of profit, the horror, absolute horror faced by those trapped in this life. I instinctively knew immediately then it wasn't right, and I had to pitch in and stop this madness. Since then, we've been privileged to be a leader in the Texas State Legislature in that fight against this abhorrent slavery. We created the very first statewide human trafficking prevention task force in the Texas Legislature, House Bill 4009. We added criminal enhancements for those who buy and sell humans as if they were commodities. And we included even those who assist in the trade and benefit from. We added them to the criminal list, and as I said to a number of groups when we spoke back in Texas, that we'd like to catch those perpetrators and put them under the jailhouse. We strengthen the penalties, we increased the definition of human trafficking so that it included a lot of these extraterritorial or extraneous criminals, I guess I should say. We added significant protections for minor victims. We wrote the code to simplify criminal prosecution. And then we began to tackle the demand. I was encouraged in reading today about one set of comments is they don't call them Johns, they call them purchasers of sex. We tackle that demand. We changed the law to allow for the creation of the first offender prosecution prevention program in our state. And the deeper involved I got into the fight, the more horror stories I heard. The larger the number grew of those impacted. And I think, Karen, you're exactly right when you say it's not the numbers that you have to look into, or maybe it was you, Mr. Chairman, it's the eyes. When you look into the eyes of the victims and you realize the pain and the suffering, you hear the stories, it just causes us to want to redouble our efforts. We mustn't let those numbers be so large that we become desensitized. We have got to keep this in the forefront, got to educate, got to make this a priority, and got to make sure that we make the public aware of it. The magnitude of the industry can literally be overwhelming, unbelievably overwhelming. We must focus in on one individual at a time, and there was some statistics in the reading today, and a lot of the comments made, I think, where there was 17,000, I forget, it was 17,500 victims in a particular state or county area, I forget. And I'm thinking if we just 1%, 175 lives, if we changed and helped 1%, what a great number that would be. Think if it was 10%, what a great number that would be. So, one person rescued, one life saved, one more person on the road to restoration. It is worth it. It is absolutely worth it. All of those stories, all of your stories, all of those individuals add up to encouragement, hope, and keep us motivated to continue this fight. I thank you for holding this, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Congressman Rohrabacher, who represents the 48th District, California, is chairman of the Subcommittee on Europe, Eurasia, and Emerging Threats. Joins us today. Mr. Rohrabacher, would you like to make a statement?
Well, I'd just like to thank the chairman, Chairman Royce, for the leadership that he is providing as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and those of us who are on the Foreign Affairs Committee, they obviously have a very wide view of the problems. All right, can you hear me now?
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Should I repeat what I said about Ed Royce? Let me just note that those of us on the Foreign Affairs Committee have a very wide view of what's going on in the world. And there's a lot of evil things that are happening in the world, a lot of things that threaten our national security, a lot of things that demand our attention for the immediate safety of our country and our people. And I applaud Ed and the other members of this committee for what we're trying to do and to meet those challenges. But you know, it's really easy when you've got these grandiose visions of an army of terrorists who want to blow up buildings and murder our people, and how we're trying to thwart that. And it's really easy to overlook maybe something that is right in our own neighborhood and is an evil that we need to pay attention to. In this case, that evil does have ties to things that are happening in foreign countries, foreign young people who are being exploited and brought here. I really, again, applaud our chairman for taking the time to look at that and to look at this and see what we can do about this issue that deserves our attention. Thank you very much, Ed.
Thank you, Congressman Rohrabacher. We are going to now turn to our witnesses, and as I shared with you before, Your full prepared statement will be part of the record, and without objection, all members may have 5 days to submit statements or questions. And I'd like to submit for the record the collection of one-page information sheets provided by the members of the Human Trafficking Congressional Advisory Caucus that I work with, and I mentioned them earlier, and that's been a very welcome resource for the committee. And with that, we'll introduce our first witness. For 4 years now, Ambassador C.D. Baca has served as Ambassador at Large and Director of the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons at the United States Department of State. Before that, he served as counsel to the House Judiciary Committee, following a successful career as a federal prosecutor, during which he received the Attorney General's Distinguished Service Award for his role as lead trial counsel in the largest slavery prosecution here in the United States. Mr. Ambassador, we thank you for being here in Orange County today and for the work that your office does every single day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, all of the members of the committee, Ranking Member Bass, and everyone else. Good morning. And thank
Ambassador,
you.
would you pull the microphone just a little closer?
Of course. Thank you for the invitation to testify and for your commitment to the fight against trafficking in persons. The work of Congress on this issue has sent a clear message that the United States rejects modern slavery and that responding to this crime, wherever it exists, is a priority for our country. Now, trafficking in persons is the umbrella term that we use for all of the conduct involved in reducing a person to or holding them in a state of compelled service, whether for sex or labor. And there's a lot of legal ways to skin that cat. There's a lot of euphemisms and different terms that get used. But I'm glad that Mr. Rohrabacher named it so plainly for all of us. It's evil. And that evil, to really illustrate what that means, I think we have to look to the survivors. We have to look to the victims. It's the man who boards a fishing boat with the promise of a good job, instead forced to work 20 hours a day for months on end, beaten, starved, told that he could keep working or lose his life. It's the woman who left home for better work as a maid in a foreign country, who instead was cut off from the outside world, never given a day's rest, passport confiscated, wages withheld, abused, and then the knock on the door at night, the sexual assaults. It's the child prostituted in a brothel, enduring unspeakable exploitation. It's the teenager aspiring to a different life, manipulated by promises of love and opportunity. These people who we know, who we've met, whose stories we seek to tell at the State Department, are from abroad, and they are American. They are men, women, and children. They are migrants, and they are people who have never left home. They are in remote countries, and they are in the communities in which they were raised. And the estimates, as we've heard, range from 21 to 28 million of them. That's why today's hearing is so valuable. It reminds us that this is not simply a crime that happens over there, or that efforts to deal with this challenge aren't just carried out from Washington. This crime must be dealt with in every town hall, courthouse, and police precinct across this country. Because modern slavery undermines the rule of law and justice. It tears at the fabric of our families and our communities, and it is an affront to all of our most dearly held values of human rights, freedom, and dignity for all people. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the way partnerships are an essential tool in this struggle. Because trafficking in persons is first and foremost a crime, it also touches many other areas: labor, immigration, health, agriculture, transportation. This is why we need to spread understanding about this crime and how it intersects with different areas of concern and jurisdiction. Much like the work, Ms. Bass, that you're doing with the Child Protective Services around the country, that notion of pre-existing jurisdictions, pre-existing systems that were set up not thinking about human trafficking, how they need to incorporate it into their work. To do that, we need to share information and practices and to cooperate on efforts to protect victims and prosecute traffickers. We have to think about how to go up the supply chain to those who profit, who don't care where their fish or fiber comes from, the hotel managers who, with reckless disregard, look the other way when a pimp sets up business on their property. At the federal level, partnerships are the center of our anti-trafficking efforts, and part of that is because of the President's interagency task force that Congress set up in 2000 through the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. This cabinet-level body meets every year to review progress across the administration and to chart our path forward. And in doing that, we've seen that we've made a great deal of progress in recent years. But we are clear-eyed about the fact that there is so much to do and that government alone cannot solve this problem. And that's why our federal partnership approach tries to bring together a wide range of activists and advocates. We're working with partners in the survivor community, the public sector, the private sector, the faith community, civil society, academia, everyone who cares enough to join this fight. Looking ahead, we know that the next step in this struggle is confronting modern slavery at the local level. After all, right now, a trafficking victim is likelier to come into contact with a local patrol officer than an FBI or an ICE agent. Right now, they're more likely to encounter a prosecutor at a specialized domestic violence unit than they are one with experience in human trafficking cases. So in the years ahead, we hope that more and more local level partnerships will emerge to help drive this effort forward. Now, the partnership model that we've adopted at the federal level will not be the right fit for every community, but there are elements of effective partnerships that we hope that state and local leaders will look to. For example, we need to make sure that everyone that could encounter a trafficking victim knows what they're seeing and has the information about what to do next. We need to make sure that justice and law enforcement works with caregivers and activists so that survivors can get the support and resources that they need. Rehabilitation, restoration, jobs, and restitution, and knowing that their abuser will not hurt them or anyone else anymore. Seeing their abusers held to account. Here in California, we've seen excellent examples of that, and we're very happy that the members of the Orange County Task Force and the Los Angeles area task forces are able to join us. These partnerships work. They work here and they work abroad. In India, NGOs are helping victims leave the brothels and the brick kilns, and the newly formed anti-human trafficking units at the state level are starting to take those cases up. In Nigeria, the NAPTIP organization is co-locating special social workers and specially trained police together for when a victim comes through the door. In Canada, Native American leaders are being brought into the fight, and hotel operators are stepping up in Mexico with job training. Partnership is the solution, whether in California or Cameroon, whether in Texas or Tunisia. In conclusion, I want to make clear to this community and to the committee that the Obama administration will partner with you and anyone who takes this crime seriously, because slavery cannot be tolerated, whether in history or in the 21st century. My former boss on the Judiciary Committee perhaps said it best when John Conyers said that emancipation was not a one-day event. It was a promise written in the blood of all who lived in bondage and all who died to end it. Today, we hear the voices of the survivors of the past and of the present. We will not shirk our duty to make good on the promise of emancipation. And I'm confident that by working in partnership, our shared goal is within reach, a world free from slavery. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me ask you one or two questions, and then we'll move down the panel with some questions on this. One of those questions I was going to ask is, we had the reauthorization of the Traffic Victims Protection Act this year. We put it into a larger bill, the Violence Against Women Act. And as part of that, we had language that was focused on what we would do on ranking of countries overseas to try to ramp up the pressure. And some of those countries have been entering into these agreements, anti-trafficking agreements. They're called partnerships that, to quote from the agreement, have resulted in concrete and measurable outcomes. What I wanted to talk to you about is, how do you get those outcomes to be something truly measurable? How do you promulgate perhaps regulations that say it's going to depend upon the number of prosecutions, or it's going to depend upon the number of victims that are assisted? something tangible that allows us more than a judgment call when you do the assessment on compliance.
I think that, Mr. Chairman, that goes to the heart of how we're looking at this requirement from the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. What we do not want, just as at the same time that we're saying that partnerships emerging as the fourth P from the 3P paradigm of prevention, protection, and prosecution, that partnerships are the way to effectuate that. But partnerships, for partnerships' sake, are not a panacea, and they should not be a refuge for a country that is doing nothing on human trafficking. And so we're working right now with the rest of the State Department as we ramp up for this coming year. It'll be the first year of the report where we're taking those partnerships into account. And one of the things that we're talking about internally is that notion of weighting those partnership efforts. And I think that just as you yourself have expressed, and just as the legislation has as its touchstone, that notion of concrete and measurable. Concrete and measurable comes back to the things that are in the other minimum standards, the number of prosecutions, the number of victims helped, whether the sentences are actually in line with kidnapping, extortion, et cetera. Those are the things I think that we're going to be looking to. So we're trying to make sure that we won't have strategic behavior on the part of countries around the world to enter into empty partnership agreements that don't have time-bound goals and structures put in place.
Well, we want to work with you on something concrete where you can show exactly what are the prosecutions, what are the programs out there to assist underage victims and so forth. The other question I was going to ask you is the Orange County Anti-Trafficking Task Force has a report that nearly 90% of the labor trafficking victims that they assist are foreign citizens. We'll hear from one such victim here on the panel today, but how significant a factor is fraudulent overseas labor recruiting in international human trafficking into the United States in your assessment?
Mr. Chairman, we think that this is a big factor in the exploitation of the workers. And this is one of the reasons why in the executive order that President Obama issued for federal contracting, the standard that we put in place and that's currently in the Federal Acquisitions Register, which is open for public comment right now, is the notion that no recruiting for fee is appropriate. Now, we understand that that's something that we can do by executive order for federal contracts, and that those who don't want to abide by that can choose not to apply for a federal contract. It's something, though, that we think that we see across the globe, that when people have to buy a job, they end up going to either the labor recruiters themselves for the loan, or they have to go to a loan shark in their home village. And so they owe so much money that they're almost already in debt bondage before they even show up at work. And so when we're looking at this through the executive order, we know that there's some legislation out there on this as well. We very much want to be moving the conversation, both in the US and globally, to confront this, because we've seen in country after country where it's not the stereotype of illegal immigration that is fueling human trafficking. It is, as we saw in this year's report, the advertisement in the paper that said Indonesian maids for sale. Perhaps more honest than they should have been. In that country, the way that they were bringing in those Indonesian maids was through labor recruiters. And so I think that that's what we see time and time again, is it's not simply the underground economy. It's in labor recruiting. It's in the places where the vulnerable are brought in to do the types of dirty and dangerous jobs that others don't want.
Thank you, Ambassador. My time's expired. Karen Bass.
Yes, I actually want to follow up on what you're saying in terms of the labor recruiting, and a couple of things. One, I wanted to ask you, which countries are involved in recruiting labor to the United States? And then in terms of the fees, I recently learned about au pairs and how they are recruited into the United States, and a person who wants an au pair pays a fee and doesn't realize that the person who wants to be an au pair pays a fee. So is there something that we could do about that, since it's directly coming here, and there are businesses that I imagine they're U.S. businesses?
As far as the biggest countries that are sending folks into the U.S. through labor recruiters, just in looking at the cases that have come to light, we have certainly seen folks coming from India. We've seen folks coming up on some of the agricultural-based visa programs from Mexico. And we've ended up seeing a lot of Eastern European labor brokers who will end up in perhaps non-traditional visa categories. The abuse that has been seen, for instance, in the summer work and travel program is something that the State Department has been looking at, issuing new rules as to what those students can be put into in the first place. So I think that it's something that we're seeing, that places that unfortunately have trafficking problems at home and that have trafficking problems when they're sending their people to the Gulf or to other parts of the world are also sending their people to U.S.
Do they
through
bring them
those
over
labor.
here legitimately, and then they fall out of status, and then they wind up being
A lot of times
undocumented?
they fall out of status because the labor recruiter is putting them into a job that they did not get approved for. So they'll bring them over. I think, for instance, a good example is a case that I prosecuted when I was at the Justice Department, where the girls, had they been taken to Virginia Beach to work in the retail stores that they were supposed to under their visa, instead they ended up in Detroit in a strip club. And at that point, they were out of status because they weren't working the case. Now, of course, the second that they were out of status, the traffickers started telling them, you know, you can't go for help because they'll turn you over to the immigration. So it's an out-of-status situation that's created by the trafficker and then exploited by the trafficker.
So are these U.S. companies, and then if you could answer the au pair question, because I guess I'm trying to get at the same thing that the chairman was mentioning. It's like, how can we tie it down to do something specific? So if they're U.S. companies, can't we do something about that? Are they, and can?
Some of them are U.S. companies. For instance, if you're looking at the au pairs, if you're looking at summer work and travel, et cetera, there are companies that exist to facilitate those things. Some of them are overseas companies where you'll have labor recruiting companies that are, for lack of a better term, flagged in other countries. So there was a situation a few years ago with a company called Global Horizon, which is actually owned by an Israeli. There's situations with folks from Bangladesh and India that are bringing people in, whether it's as trainee visas or otherwise. So it's, I think, something that we've seen both U.S. and foreign companies, but all of those end up going through the visa process. And so there's very much a federal jurisdictional hook, whether it's through immigration law or whether it's through regulating these American companies. As far as the au pairs are concerned, I think, you know, what we've seen is that this notion of double dipping by the recruitment fees is a problem around the world. And I was talking recently to the now former president of Manpower Group, who says that he told the folks from the Bangladeshi Recruiters Association, Manpower does not require the applicant to pay. It's the employer, the potential employer, pays all of the costs. And they're a very reputable, the largest sourcing company in the world. And they've done that profitably, not by shifting the costs over to the workers. And one of the things that he certainly has seen was that not only was the exploitation higher, but the ability of those recruiting companies to get the right workers into the right jobs is less, because they don't care about that. The only thing they care about is this person willing to mortgage themselves to me so that I will then be able to profit from placing them. So I think that making sure that the model that we've seen successfully in the marketplace of employer pays for recruiting as opposed to employee pays kickback to get the job, moving towards that would be, I think, revolutionary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Bass. We go now to Congressman Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me follow up on that, and Mr. Ambassador, if I may. You said you were speaking to, was it a former exec of Manpower? Okay. And you said that from Bangladesh, and they have Recruiters Association? Are we able to get in touch with those associations and say, look, we would like to see an outline, a format whereby we can track this, or do we have that capability?
We certainly have the ability to meet with the folks from BIRA, for instance, in Bangladesh. I think that what we've seen is that the pressure that was being put on BIRA, both by the U.S. Government, by some of the other destination countries, but also by the Bangladeshi government in the wake of them passing their new trafficking law about a year and a half ago, may have lessened a little bit as so much of the attention now has moved over towards the tragedy at the Rana Plaza, where the collapse of the building, coming as it did after another tragedy involving a fire. I think that right now a lot of the energy in the relationship with Bangladesh around workers' treatment and safety is being seen through that lens of the garment sector and the kind of...
Ambassador, you're going to have to pull that microphone closer.
Sorry about that. So I think that what we've seen is that the focus on the garment sector in the wake of the Rana Plaza tragedy and others perhaps has taken a little bit of the heat off of the BIRA, the Bangladesh Labor Recruiters Association. But it's something that we continue to look at, and we're certainly trying to work with the Bangladeshi government to put pressure.
Well, I was unaware, forgive me, Mr. Chairman, for taking so long, but I was unaware that there was those kinds of associations. So I guess my question is, if we went country by country, and I know there's hundreds of, 180 or whatever number of countries it is, and we've got the good guys who will sign up with an association, trying to do it the right way. Mm-hmm. Of course, the bad actors are not going to do that. But can we give them an incentive in each of those countries, those associations, in order to turn over to us the names of the bad actors? Because I'm sure they'd like to do away with that competition as well. We have a little incentive, competition incentive there for them. Have we tried that to your knowledge?
That specifically, I don't think that we've necessarily tried, and I think that we'll definitely take that on board. I think that one of the things that we're very interested in, and we're seeing this with the supply chain work that really first came out of the California Supply Chain Transparency Act that I know a lot of folks here in the room worked so hard on, and that is that notion of the companies that use these recruiting companies, the companies that are using those factories such as the Rana Plaza and others, having to now publicize their anti-slavery and their anti-trafficking policies. That's something that is only here in California. It doesn't have a lot of penalties. It doesn't look as to how good those policies actually are. I know that our cousins over in the UK are looking at legislation now that would be more akin to the Dodd-Frank work on the conflict minerals, where companies are going to have to start certifying the conflict minerals come this spring. And so that's something to look at. I think, I'm not sure if she's reintroduced it, but I think Ms. Maloney may have some legislation on that for trafficking and slavery as a whole. That may be a way to look at this to be able to drive that change, much as the Dodd-Frank legislation did with the Eastern Congo.
That's something that I hope you'll look at. And one final question. I know that we have tiers set up, tier 1, 2, and 3, and we have countries that wind up getting bad grades, and that we can wind up actually having sanctions against them. And it seems like there's been a new category established, an automatic downgrade. How did that come about, and was that because we were sensitive to the foreign diplomacy? I mean, if we have a bad actor, much as a China or some of the others, do we not just, do we somehow try to soften that blow? How did that come about?
Well, I was on staff at the time, and I know that a lot of the members had the concern as we were looking at the 2008 reauthorization the concern that a number of strategic countries had been on the Tier 2 watch list for many years. And there was the term that we bandied about at the time, both staff and member level, was this notion of the Tier 2 watch list parking lot. The idea that a country might be so important that you just had them on Tier 2 watch list rather than actually having them fall to Tier 3. The way that the auto downgrade works is that over the course of several years, the country can avoid falling automatically if it has an action plan and resources to effectuate that action plan. Some countries were able to do that, and other countries fell to Tier 3. This last year, the waivers for the action plans were no longer available, and we indeed saw Russia, China, and Uzbekistan fall to Tier 3 on the Trafficking in Persons report. And we've seen, I think, certainly the downgrading of those countries having good results as far as conversations that we've been having since then. I'm going to be going to Moscow soon. I was meeting with the Uzbek ambassador a couple of days ago. So I think that it's something that we're getting these countries' attention through the auto downgrade.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you. We go to Mr. Rohrabacher of Huntington Beach.
Could you give us some, just 2 or 3 specific recommendations of where local officials and local authorities could work with the federal government and vice versa with the federal government, where you would like to see a expansion of cooperation or of doing a better job?
Thank you, Mr. Rohrabacher. I think that the places where we'd like to see that better job done, I think, is in the notion of the longer-term, more proactive investigations. Right now, there's kind of a divide between feds do long-term investigation and local first responders are doing kind of, you go to a hotel, you see something, you charge it, and then it gets referred up to the prosecutor's office, and that first police officers kind of hand off the case. It's phenomenal detectives in state and local law enforcement around the country, and they can do that type of longer-term, more proactive investigation. They can only do that, though, if they are cut loose from some of their other responsibilities. It's a bit of a zero-sum game right now. If you take somebody off of looking at drugs in biker gangs so that you can then go after the pimps, then the biker gang problem ends up getting out of control. So I think that that's one of the things that we want to look at, but recognizing that this is a time of austerity. This is not necessarily a time of new federally funded task forces, as we've seen in some other areas in the past. So I think that, to me, one of the things is that notion of moving away from responsive law enforcement and moving towards proactive law enforcement, harnessing the power of the local detectives to really make cases.
Thank you very much.
We have been joined by Congressman Alan Lowenthal, who represents the 47th District in California, and he serves on the Subcommittee on Terrorism, Nonproliferation, and Trade. Thank you very much, Alan. Did you have any questions at this time? Okay, we are going to go now to our second panel, and we'll begin with Tony Rakakis, 4th term as District Attorney here in Orange County. He served as judge and presiding appellate judge of the Orange County Superior Court, also as a municipal court judge, as a social worker in Los Angeles County. He is a former U.S. Army paratrooper. He is a graduate of the Loyola University School of Law in Los Angeles. We also have Ms. Kay Buck, CEO and Executive Director of the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, that's CAST, in Los Angeles. During her 20 years of human rights work, Kay Buck has served as Director of the Rape Prevention Resource Center of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And she spent over 5 years in Asia working with non-governmental groups on anti-slavery projects there. We have Miss Angela Guanzone, a survivor of international trafficking who, while attempting to help support her family, was lured from her home in the Philippines to Long Beach, California. Now a certified nurse assistant, she is a member of the National Survivor Network and the Caste Survivor Advisory Caucus. She was honored with their 2012 Seeds of Renewal Award for her advocacy and her leadership. Miss Carissa Phelps is founder and CEO of Runaway Girl. She is a survivor of child sex trafficking and an abusive life on the streets as a runaway youth. I think at the age of 12, this challenge began for her. And she later earned her JD and MBA degree from UCLA School of Law and the UCLA Anderson School of Management. And she was named one of her alma mater's top 100 inspirational graduates in 2010. We welcome all of our panel, and we'll begin with Tony Rakakis. 5-minute testimony, if you want to summarize, and then we'll go to questions from the members.
Thank you, Chairman Royce, Ranking Member Bass, and other distinguished members of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. Thank you for convening this hearing on one of the most significant abuses that's plaguing us locally and globally. It's a $32 billion enterprise, and it's second only to narcotic sales and profitability. And Chairman Royce, thank you for your continued leadership in this fight, including the recent introduction of the new bill, H.R. 3344, the FORT Act, which is Fraudulent Overseas Recruitment and Trafficking Elimination Act of 2013. 150 years ago, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation and declared that all persons held as slaves henceforth shall be free. Today, 150 years later, we've been given a new mandate by state and national legislation. More than 2/3 of the commercial sex victims in the U.S. are American citizens, while 1/3 of them are trafficked from foreign countries. It's time that we abolish this modern-day slavery, including the commercial sexual exploitation of women and children. Human exploitation and trafficking generally comes in two forms: forced labor, which we believe is highly underreported, and commercial sexual exploitation. Unfortunately, the things that make our county so great and such a tourist destination with our mild weather and available wealth also make our county one of the circuit stops for these sex traffickers and modern-day slave owners. The most concerning cases are the children who are being prostituted on the streets, in strip clubs, in brothels, and child pornography also that's being produced and traded on the internet and around the world just simply with the click of a mouse. No child grows up hoping to someday be sold for sex. Shockingly, the average age of a child being trafficked in this county is 12. A little girl who hasn't even reached her teens. These victims are being isolated, coerced, seduced, threatened, and beaten into turning profits for these individuals. These people have absolute disregard for other human beings. One of our defendants made a $25,000 profit in 2 weeks off of just one trafficked victim. One defendant denied medical care for a young woman who was begging to see a doctor for her burning pelvic region. Another refused a shivering girl from coming inside from the cold. When one of the victims pleaded by text, "I can't keep anything down, you don't care," the defendant's response was, expletive, "Eat crackers." Career criminals and gang members have decided that exploiting humans is cheaper and safer than trafficking drugs and guns. A typical modern-day slave owner is Bernil Holman, who was convicted of pandering a 16-year-old victim in Orange County. Before he perpetrated this crime, he had previously attempted to rape a 10-year-old girl and tried to use a 13-year-old girl to turn tricks for the 10-year-old. Like the slaves of the past, before they were emancipated, modern-day sex slaves are branded with tattoos of their owners' names. They're being bullied and beaten into selling their bodies, some over 10 times a day. For many of these victims, the slave owner is the only family they have, and they're forced to call these people daddy. Some of these victims are foreign women who are lured with the promise of earning a lot of cash to work in a legitimate job, and then they're stripped of their passports and forced instead to work in brothels. Some of these brothels are located in luxury apartments in upper-class neighborhoods in Orange County. In order to protect these victims, the Orange County District Attorney's Office has responded to the mandate of the people by formalizing our efforts and launching a new vertical prosecution unit named HEAT, Human Exploitation and Trafficking. The HEAT unit scrapped the conventional and traditional ways of law enforcement and took a fresh, more comprehensive approach to solve the problem using a tactical plan called PERP, Prosecution, Education, Resources, and Publicity. With the new weapons provided by Proposition 35, these defendants are going away to state prison for multiple years and even life terms. We've been educating police officers, prosecutors, students, community members, and we want to produce webinars and videos to take the message directly to parents and to children. The human trafficking victims need to be rescued, and we need to have resources to do that. They need a place to go, or they'll end up back on the street with their abusers. The Orange County Public and Private Partnership, made up of corporations, nonprofits, faith-based groups, law enforcement, and victims' rights groups, work hard to rescue these girls off the street. But sadly, we need a lot more resources. We're working hard now. Our HEAT unit has been in operation for about a year, or maybe a little more than a year, and we have many open cases. We have cases involving victims who are from other countries, involving victims who are from the United States. We have quite a number of felony cases. 5 of those defendants are facing life counts, and many others are facing mandatory sentences of several years in prison. Like I said, we have some victims who are foreign nationals also. Our HEAT unit is here, and I'm very proud of the work that they've been doing. And the police, you can see also from the Anaheim Police Department, are the head of the HEAT, the Orange County, not HEAT, but the Orange County Victims group that we have in working to reduce this kind of a problem. So I think they've done a magnificent job in Orange County. In fact, I think I can, with some pride, say that we have a defendant, for example, who's in prison, and he's been grumbling that if he was in another county, he'd be out by now. So with legislation and prosecutions and the kinds of sentences that get their attention, I think that we can make some inroads. And thank you again for conducting this forum so that we can end this modern-day slavery now.
Thank you, Mr. Rakakis. We go now to Kay Buck.
Thank you, Chairman Royce, and the committee members for holding this forum today. As the chairman mentioned, my name is Kay Buck, and I'm the executive director of the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, also known as CAST. We're located in Los Angeles, California. Since 1998, CAST has been providing specialized services to survivors of human trafficking, while informing the movement to prevent modern-day slavery through our evidence-based approaches. CAST has worked directly with over 1,000 survivors and their children and family members from over 58 countries around the world, including a growing population right here from the United States. To provide emergency response, shelter, case management, and legal services, as well as a high-level leadership development program for survivors. CAST works closely with other non-governmental organizations. We are a coalition, pro bono attorneys, law enforcement agents, as well as both federal and local government agencies. We were the founder of the Los Angeles Metropolitan Task Force on Human Trafficking many years ago, and we're the first to do that in the country. However, despite ongoing efforts to leverage existing resources, CAST acutely feels the gap in services because of the shortage of resources that are currently available for survivors of human trafficking. And I want to thank the chairman for pointing out all of my coalition partners in Orange County earlier in the hearing. They are the human rights defenders of our time, and they do so with very little resources. Last July, a report showed that the U.S. government spends approximately $100 million annually to combat the $9 billion and growing industry of human trafficking. Compare this to the approximate $15 billion that we spend annually on the war against drugs. Clearly, efforts to prevent trafficking and assist more and more survivors need more support. And this is evident in our numbers. 3 years in a row, our numbers in serving new cases, new people coming to us for help, have doubled 3 years in a row. And I'm sure my colleagues in Orange County have similar statistics. Victims of human trafficking are enslaved not only through physical means, but also through coercion, through fear and intimidation. In today's global economy, workers can be enslaved by threats of deportation, lack of viable alternatives, and especially debt. We often think of undocumented immigrants as vulnerable to human trafficking, but almost 50% of our cases at CAST include individuals who come to the United States on lawful visas. Human trafficking thrives when immigrant workers are forced to pay labor recruiters these high fees, and what we saw as maybe $2,000 a fee 10 years ago is now upwards of $30,000. They are often charged very high interest rates, most of the time to loan sharks in their community, which puts their families at risk. And they do this in order to work lawfully in the United States. So these workers actually become vulnerable to debt bondage, one of the most pervasive forms of modern-day slavery today. CAST believes that one of the most important policy changes we can make is better regulation of foreign labor recruiters through the following four-pronged approach. First, the elimination of fees. Foreign labor contractors should not be allowed to assess any fees to the worker. Such fees may be borne by the employer. Second is disclosure. Foreign labor contractors must disclose all of the terms and conditions of the work in writing in both English as well as the worker's native language. Third is registration. Employers must use foreign labor contractors who are properly registered with the Department of Labor. And last but not least is enforcement and accountability. The Department of Labor should establish a process for receiving, investigating, and adjudicating complaints against either foreign labor contractors or employers. CAST commends Chairman Royce for his leadership in introducing H.R. 3344 in the House. This piece of legislation takes the comprehensive four-pronged approach I just outlined, and this bill is such an important one that will help prevent human trafficking and protect more workers. In addition to the protections already mentioned in the legislation, I'd like to recommend also the inclusion of J-1 visa holders so that au pairs and nannies will receive the same protection as other workers coming to the U.S. from abroad. Finally, CAST believes that the business community must be an integral partner in combating modern-day slavery. CAST was an original co-sponsor of SB 657, the California Transparency and Supply Chains Act that the ambassador mentioned earlier. It requires companies to publicly reveal the steps they are taking to eradicate modern-day slavery from their supply chains. Today, over 400 goods in 342 countries are produced by either child or forced labor. Given how prevalent modern-day slavery is in the global supply chain, CAST now hopes that measures similar to the law that we have in California, SB 657, can be adopted federally. We call for the House to reintroduce the Business Transparency on Trafficking and Slavery Act. Thank you for your attention today and for the invitation to testify before all of you. And I also want to commend you for including survivors not only to speak of the suffering that they endured in the course of human trafficking, but as the experts they are, to really help us find the policies that will eradicate modern-day slavery. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kay. Angela?
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Royce. My name is Angela. I'm from Philippines. I came to the United States with a lawful visa and a promise to have a good job. In the Philippines, coming to the United States is like winning a lottery. I was so excited to go that I didn't even ask many questions. When I got my visa to go to the United States, my passport was taken away from me, and I was told it will be held for me until I get to the United States. I traveled with other 10 workers to the United States. When I get to the United States, things were very different than I thought. I was told I owed $12,000 for my transportation and visa and have to work for 10 years to pay it off. I was then forced to work in a retirement home for elderly care located in a suburb in Los Angeles. I work 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we have to sleep in the floor and the hallways. My coworker and I, Jason, were threatened that if we try to escape, we will be deported by calling the police and telling them that we stole something from her. In my situation, it tells that trafficking is only for women, it's also for men. And this went on for 2.5 years. Finally, I was rescued by the FBI through the neighbor noticed that we didn't get a day off. I spoke to the FBI about what happened to me, and eventually I testified against my trafficker in a criminal court, and she got a 5-year sentence. Now I'm a certified nurse assistant and a member of CAST Survivor Advisory Caucus and a National Survivor Network. CAST Survivor Advisory Caucus is a group of survivors that learning leadership and advocacy skills to raise awareness of human trafficking and to influence policies to help better protect and help the survivor of human trafficking. National Survivor Network consists of like 58 or 60 survivors around 18 states of here in the United States. I don't believe that what happened to me will happen to other people. Because of the work that I do in CAST, I've learned that the abuse that happened to me happened to a lot of survivors that I met in National Survivor Network and CAST Survivor Advisory Caucus. I've learned that I met a lot of workers that came with an H-2B visa that is supposed to work in no, H-2A visa, sorry. I've learned that they came to work in an agriculture, but they were ended up enslaved in a farm all over the United States here with the armed guard keeping watch. And some have an H-2B visa and a promise to have a good job like I was told, but ended up working in a hotel under the threat of police. I'm very thankful for Chairman Royce for making such a big steps to introduce the HR 3344, and I feel that he's really listening, and he's really listening about the issue, and I am so proud that I'm here today supporting this HR 3344 in behalf of the survivor, so we could speak and we could be in a world that's free of abuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Carissa.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to be here and to speak about this strength in survivorship. At 12 years old, I thought I was born free. I thought that I could do anything and be free. But when I was kidnapped by a trafficker, kidnapped by a pimp, in the town that I was born in, people looked the other way. Law enforcement looked the other way. Social services looked the other way. and I was blamed for what was done to me. It took me over 15 years earning my education, graduating from law school and business school, connecting with community members, to be able to embrace my story, to be able to share it, and to be able to seek this difference that we see today, this movement that we see today to end trafficking for domestic minors of sex trafficking. The work that I do is not just based on my story from the past. It's my story of advocacy. I found out as I was becoming an advocate that survivors who were sitting alongside of me did not have financial means to be there. They were not being compensated, they had daycare issues, they had transportation issues, and they were being asked to come in and share their stories, asked to influence policy, asked to make policy, write policy, inform policy, and yet they were not being treated as experts in the sense that they were not being compensated. At one very high profile and federally supported event, survivors were separated from the experts and taken to a basement room and asked to share their horror stories to complete strangers. I was told at that event that I was not a SME, a subject matter expert, and so that's why I was left out. I informed that person that I in fact was an attorney and did hold an MBA and was an expert. But I realized at that moment that we needed a united front. We needed to connect with each other and to stand up for each other in these instances. And since then, I founded Runaway Girl as a flexible purpose corporation. And what that means is that we have a charitable purpose in our articles of incorporation. It is a way for us to create a platform and lower barriers to entry for survivors who are speaking out and educating. It has no borders. It doesn't see international and domestic as any different. The more united we are, the stronger we are. Slave owners knew that. When Willie Lynch wrote this infamous letter up to his colleagues who were slave owners and told them that they needed to lower the self-esteem, to basically demean their slaves and to divide them and have them fight against each other, the light-skinned against the dark-skinned, the house against the field. And when he did that, he knew what he was doing. When he was dividing them, he was keeping slavery in existence. In order to end slavery, we need to unite. We need to build up each individual survivor and support them and unite them across any borders, globally, together. And I believe that's how we're going to end slavery for good. In this next step, as we look at this legislation that was survivor-informed, I do have recommendations. I do believe that anyone who is receiving any type of support or is a corporation needs to look at and figure out if someone has been a victim of human trafficking. And they should never be arrested for immigration issues. They should never be charged, held in a prison for being a prostitute or for solicitation or even for a runaway violation if they in fact have been recruited out and are being trafficked. As long as we arrest and we hold people criminally accountable for what's been done to them, we're allowing slavery to exist. We need to address demand. We need to arrest demand, literally arrest demand. We need to treat demand as part of the trafficking equation. So trafficking in arms and trafficking in drugs, we know requires sellers and buyers and that they're all traffickers, but for some reason we have excluded buyers from our trafficking work and what we do. We will no longer protect the buyers who allow this to happen. As a survivor group and as a survivor voice, I I hear that loud and clear from my colleagues and from my friends, and we must end the demand for trafficking by going after those people who allow it to happen. From the very tops to the very bottoms in our society, we have people who buy children and who buy labor and who are enslaving, and we need to hold them accountable as buyers as well, with more than 5-year sentences, with more than 13-month sentences, with real sentences for what they've done, which is taking away someone's freedom. My final recommendation is to invest in survivors, individually and in groups. We need to see the longevity of survivors. What is it that they're offering as they're growing and learning and becoming a part of our community once again? How can we, in the long run, expect survivors to be there if we're having them pay their own way to be there? It just doesn't make any sense. So investing in survivors individually and in groups and supporting their global leadership and supporting them, supporting each other, is something that I would highly recommend. And I think the people who are here today that are doing the work, and I know that here at Cal State Fullerton there's a Let's Respond group who's part of the FACT Alliance and the fight against child trafficking, and that does not have borders, does not see international and domestic differently, that supports freedom for children in all areas of the world. So thank you so much for your support today.
Thank you, Carissa. Thank you, Carissa, for that testimony. And I was going to ask Tony Rakakis, the district attorney, a question along that line. Your circumstance, the fact that, as Tony shared, the average for teen underage girls now is 12 when they're bringing these cases. Under the new law, under Prop 35, I guess one of the advantages is a focus on those involved in the criminal syndicates and those participating as pimps, and more focus on those who create the demand as well. But the fact that we have that new prosecution with the result of 32 years for an individual who was involved in trying to recruit underage girls, and this particular girl was 13 that he tried to lure up to Sacramento, and he was caught doing it. Let me ask you, if I could, Mr. Rakakis, are there any common factors that increase the susceptibility, the nature of the risk for a 12-year-old, 13-year-old being vulnerable to being trafficked? If you could give us some insights on that. And what strategies have our panelists found to be most successful in addressing that particular problem?
Well, those are certainly great questions. I think that as far as the vulnerability is concerned, what seems to happen mostly is that they wind up meeting somebody, and this person appears to be somebody who looks fine and appears to be upstanding, and gets them into a car or some kind of a compromising situation, and then just takes them off. And we've seen quite a number of cases where a young girl would willingly get in a car with somebody or go off with somebody, and then of course once that person gets control, he winds up taking her quite far away. It's not usually just in the local area, but it might be to another state, and then gets control, dominates her, beats her up a few times to let her know that she can't disobey anything that he has to say, and then he starts trafficking her. So as far as what would be the common thing, I don't know if I can put my finger on it, except to say that just this being out, being on their own, being out on their own, not being supervised, and winding up being in the hands of a stranger. It's not usually a kidnapping off the street where somebody jumps out of the bushes and grabs a young girl and throws her in the car. It's usually a cooperative sort of a thing. And
Kay, let me ask you that question too, or any of the other panelists.
The same question?
Yes, just
Okay.
the factors that, in your opinion, make girls at that age at risk for being recruited into or kidnapped into this type of situation.
Well, there are definitely factors, and certainly socioeconomic status is one factor. That said, we have served survivors here in LA who've had university degrees. So I think we need to look at, there's a domestic population, U.S. citizen survivors. There's also a foreign national population. And I really want to credit Carissa for saying that their similarities are more than the differences. And as a movement, we need to look at this more when we are looking at the factors of vulnerability. So what I'm saying is that the foreign labor contractor who drives into a community in a foreign country and looks nice, drives a nice car, says, come with me, or let me take your children, I'll give them a really great education, is not that different from the pimp who seeks out a young girl in the same fashion. So when we're talking about vulnerability factors, and I do want to say that we're really proud to be working with Representative Bass's office on the child welfare system, and we're doing some really innovative things in LA, working with the County Board of Supervisors to address the vulnerability factors, which can be everything from socioeconomic status to, to the traffickers going in and being allowed to do recruitment in the way that they're doing that. So I think there's a lot of vulnerability factors, is what I'm saying.
Thank you, Kay. I was going to ask one last question of Angela, and that is, if during the visa application process you'd been given information about anti-trafficking protections under U.S. law, or maybe the number to that anti-trafficking hotline, do you think that that would have helped you escape sooner, Angela? Angela, if you'd had access
I'm so sorry.
to the anti-trafficking hotline at the point that you had the visa application, would that have helped you if that had been given up front, or if you had been given information about anti-trafficking protections in the United States? Would that have assisted?
Yes, it would be help, and I'm just going to share this one of the Cash Survivor Advisory Caucus that we have, a member. She worked as a nanny, and they were based on Middle East. And when they came, when she went to the immigration, somebody handed her the flaglets about the hotline, and that's how she got help. When they get to the hotel, she called the number, and that's how she got help from CAS.
Thank you, thank you. We're going to go to Representative Karen Bass.
Thank you. Well, once again, let me just thank all of the witnesses for your testimony. And to Carissa and Angela, I really appreciate you coming forward and being willing to share your story. And Carissa is just amazing because I met her years ago, and back when you were a student, and to see your progress and what you've done is just really incredible. And I appreciated that you pointed out the demand side, and also that you talked about how those of us who are well-meaning have to make real sure that we don't reoffend or exploit your time in the way that you described. But we mentioned the demand, and this I wanted to go to our witness that's a DA. One of the things that I don't understand, and especially in the underage side, I don't understand, and maybe I'm wrong, but that the men aren't charged with rape. Because, and also that you can't even use, I don't think you can use the word prostitution for a child. Because the child does not, if you're below the age of consent, then how can you be considered a participant? So the question is, are people charged with rape as opposed to soliciting?
Yes. Yeah, the answer to the question is, of course, yes. Any time that that we would have a case with a child who's so young, that person would definitely be charged with rape. And but this Proposition 35, by the way, has been very helpful. I mean, this has been even since AB 109 went into effect, and so many people in California don't go to prison. Under Prop 35, we're sending a lot of these traffickers to prison now for long time periods.
But the solicitors, the Johns.
If we can show, if we can show that the John knows or should know that this young lady is under 18 years of age, then yes, we would of course charge that person with at least with statutory rape.
Right, because isn't anybody supposed to know that? I mean, that's what statutory rape is, right? So, because what I understand, this is what the LA FBI told me, is that guys specifically ask for age. I mean, apparently there's places in LA where you can go on this one street, and that's where they're between 12 and 13, and so people are specifically doing that. So it's raising the issue of really going after the demand. I mean, obviously the traffickers, but the demand as well.
Absolutely, and we're not calling them Johns anymore. Not using that kind of a euphemism now. They're being referred to as sex purchasers.
Or if they're underage, they're
right. And if they're
serial rapists.
And if they're underage, we're going to prosecute them with on the rape charge. And if the victim is not underage, then of course we are still going to prosecute them for soliciting, and we're going to publicize their names as well.
Good. Now, are the girls, when they are arrested, which I do understand, sometimes that's an important thing to do, but what are they charged with? They're not charged with soliciting, right?
Well, in the past, it's always been a soliciting to commit prostitution, but we're taking a much different approach on that now because of looking at the circumstances, and we're treating them like the victims that they are, and we're trying to work with them to develop the case so that we can, because we need them to give us the information that will take us to the person who's trafficking them.
I know, and I bet you that's a huge challenge because it's probably very difficult for them to actually do that. And I think it's part of a community education to not view an underage child as being capable of prostitution. You know what I mean? Changing that.
It's a huge challenge, and that's one of the reasons we're talking about resources, because we're committing, of course, resources from the DA's office, and the Anaheim Police Department has resources committed for the countywide committee. But a lot of the police departments don't have that kind of resource,
right.
And it requires a good deal of investigation. It's not just a quick thing. It requires a serious investigation that's going to take place over time to get the job done. So,
exactly.
So that's an issue with us too.
Thank you. And then
Thank you.
just one final question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, is Carissa, if there was one type of social service that would be most needed for the girls, what is that?
I think the number one protective factor that's come up is information and education. It's empowering those young women and boys and foreign nationals, people that are vulnerable. It's giving that phone number and that information at a very early age and early stage, because not everyone who even has a mom and dad at home have protection and information about what's going on out on the streets. And I think with more education, and that would lead to greater prevention.
Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really glad to our district attorney friend here that you've chosen not to call them Johns. We fought that fight in Texas. We have a term for them, but since we're being recorded and maybe broadcast, I won't tell you what that is. I said earlier we'd like to put them under the jailhouse. The city of Waco had a great program where they actually posted their pictures on billboards throughout the city, and I'd love to see every city doing that. And one of you cited, Carissa, maybe it was you, a study by a lady that said purchasers of sex, POS. That's what we call them. if they pretty much agreed that if they had paid $1,000 to $2,000 fine or spent a month in jail, that they wouldn't be out looking for it. And I was shocked when I did some research on her. She's actually been doing research all the way back to '94 along these lines. I don't know how far you followed her. It's really interesting, really good stuff. And the thought occurred to me, and Mr. District Attorney, you might be able to tell me, you know, we have sexual offender registries, and we put those online, and they're precluded from living near schools, and it varies by state. But how about this? What if we put that on their driver's license so that when they have a habit, and it gets better, so just stay tuned. When they have a habit of being POSs, it goes on their driver's license and their credit report. People need to know what they spend their money for. Has anybody ever thought I mean, I'm talking from a policy-making standpoint. Have you ever heard of any legislation like that?
I have not.
We'll get to work on that.
Maybe it would be helpful if you would come and work with our California legislature on that particular idea.
Okay, and then another question I have, it seems to me that we're talking about education and helping our victims, the needs they need the most, and I appreciate Member Bass's question, what do they need the most? Are we going down into the junior high and middle schools?
Oh, yeah.
And are we saying, ladies, guys, this is what's out there in store. You need to be aware of it. You need to be up on it. We're doing that in the local school districts, are we? One is saying yes, the other is saying no. We're having a disagreement here.
We want to. We
do
definitely want to, and we want to bring more survivor leaders in for that preventative work because we know it's personal stories that make that impact. So it's definitely something we're looking at is partnership with school districts. Some have reached out and been very proactive about it. Others will need some mandates to get it done.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I would just encourage you to do that. Any help we can give, and I know you all have very capable members here in California would help too. So Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you. We'll go now to Mr. Rohrbacher, and then we'll finalize with Mr. Lowenthal.
So I assume by the last answer that perhaps we need to be more proactive in our schools at an earlier age and giving as much warning to our young people. That's something we need to do more of.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the study, but I'll provide it to you later. There was a study for overseas victims, and it was about positive deviance. So when all of these vulnerable factors are in place, when all of them are in play, when they don't have, when they're living in poverty, when trafficking is all around them in their community, what was the difference for the people that were not trafficked, the positive deviance? And it was information and education, and that is true empowerment. And it says, you know, we can inoculate and prevent this from happening with information and education.
And Tony, or Mr. District Attorney, excuse me, I've been noticing in your testimony about we've sent 24 defendants to state prison, and you have 40 active felony cases, or 5 defendants facing lifelong counts and other major accomplishments in terms of law enforcement. You interact with your fellow district attorneys because in your final quote here it says one of the fellows that you picked up and was in county jail said that he would have been out if he was in another county. So how do you rate, and I won't ask you to rate them specifically by name, but how do you rate the way district attorneys around the country are doing on this issue?
I think that district attorneys' offices are not uniform. That there's been I think an awareness or an awakening that has developed just in the last couple of years, and So it's in the process of developing at this point. I know that in the last a statewide district attorney conference that we had, the California Attorney General and some other district attorneys made a lot of effort to present information, particularly the Alameda District Attorney, but a lot of effort to present this kind of evidence and the sort of things that we're talking about here to the DAs on a statewide level, and I think that that's improving a great deal.
Was that a good, giving them a good assessment or a bad assessment for your fellow DAs? I put you on the spot.
Giving them an improving assessment.
But I think that's what we're supposed to do at hearings like this. I mean, is law enforcement, I mean, number one, I'm satisfied that you're doing a great job. I wouldn't have backed you for election otherwise. I'm satisfied with that. I'm not necessarily satisfied that law enforcement around the country is meeting that same standard.
You know, we have. I can just relate more to Orange County, and I can tell you that police departments are having a tough time trying to keep resources in this kind of an area. For example, we have one of our large police departments has a number of people who are in the vice squad, and they've been paying attention and doing these investigations for the last year and a half or 2 years and doing some pretty good work. But now, with the cutting of resources and the difficulty of keeping resources on a particular in an area like this, they're probably going to take those resources away and just put them in the more general kind of police work. So it's tough to get good local investigations to bring these cases forward.
Okay. Well, obviously, this is not the job of just the local police, and it's obviously more than the job of just our local school teachers. And Mr. Royce is pointing out the national and international aspect of this challenge to our society. And so, obviously, we had heard from the administration a commitment of all of us working together, and I think that's what it's all about. Thank you very much, Mr. Royce, and all of the witnesses.
Mr. Alan Lowenthal.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I have a question for Ms. Buck, but really the question will be follow-on to really all the panelists. I really want to compliment you for advocating for victims of human trafficking. Your work, obviously here today and with all the panelists, sheds really light on this egregious offense which affects the dignity of, I think, worldwide, of more than 20 million people. And I noticed that CAS provides, and looking through and listening to you, many critical kinds of services, such as legal services and emergency response and shelter and case management. But I'm interested in this particular subset in terms of the healing of people that have gone through. As a mental health professional in the Congress, I'd really like to understand from you and from the others about how we really deal with some of the long-range healing of people who've been subjected to this kind of abuse, really long-term abuse, and if you can shed some light on what we should be dealing with in terms of long-term mental health issues. And then I'd like to ask the rest of the panelists who've also about really where mental health really fits into this.
Absolutely, that's a great question, because I think, as both Carissa and Angela pointed out, empowerment is really necessary. Sometimes the traditional modalities of mental health are not necessarily provided through an empowerment program or an empowerment approach. And so what the field is really moving towards is what's called trauma-informed care. And so any service, actually even our legal services program at CAST, we train our attorneys in trauma-informed care. so that not only our mental health services are delivered in that fashion, but legal services, shelter, and emergency response. And that has been the #1 indicator for us of success, where we work very closely with survivors. Most survivors stay with us on average about 2 years. So we have the opportunity and really the privilege of following them through their healing process. And what we know works is a variety of options. So it's not one modality that people have to stick through that whole 2-year process. It's really using the arts or music. Mentoring as well is something that is very helpful. When you think about it, most of our clients, whether they be a domestic client or a foreign national client, come to us with a very small support system. Sometimes they don't have any support system at all. So by empowering them and helping them connect with other survivors, that begins their social network, and then going into the community to do that more, we have a lot more success. We're piloting something that's new in the coming weeks, where it's called Open Table. And it's actually a modality that's used and is very popular and has been very successful in Arizona in a faith-based context and for a homeless population. We're adapting it to serve human trafficking survivors, where they can meet every Sunday with a group of community members who can mentor them, who can become their social network for 2 years at a time. And they open up jobs for them, they connect them to other community resources. That's the kind of services that's really necessary. So it's not a traditional modality, but rather other progressive modalities that we know works.
Thank you. And I wonder if other panelists might want to comment about the healing process and how we empower people and how we kind of even change what I've just heard is the very nature of the delivery of all services, that this empowerment model has to be included in the training of all folks, including law enforcement. And so I'm just wondering how that is being played out in your experiences and what you can add to that, because I am convinced that frequently we overlook mental health as one of the critical issues to deal with.
I'm just going to speak for myself. I live in a shelter for CAST for a 1.5 years, and through the CAST Survivor Advisory Caucus, we have this every week or once in a month, we have this potluck. And before, I was so scared to get out from the shelter because I don't know anybody. I'm so scared that if I go out, I might be like with anybody else, or am I gonna be like somebody knows that I'm different. But through the CAST Survivor Advisory Caucus, they make me feel that I am, even though I've been in that situation, I have a family and a CAST staff. They are so good for making us feel and teaching us the proper way of we can say no, because in our situation, no is not a right word for us. But from the CAST staff, they usually ask us every step or every decision that we're gonna do, they usually ask us, you have entitled to say no, it's up to you. So with that, we learn, and the caucus, I've learned that being outside in the shelter is like just a regular people that you can be mingled and talk to, and there's no like separation between us and the people outside.
When I initially came out with my story, I would be introduced at events that had nothing to do with trafficking, as here's Carissa Phelps, a former child prostitute. And it became the fixation of people when they met me. And so education in our communities as well is critical. And with sexual assault, any type of victimization, educating your community about how to receive people, whether they're law enforcement, education, mental health providers, is critical. Susan Drager from West Coast Clinic, she's in Alameda County, and she's the leading expert for child sex trafficking response, mental health response. she's, I think, getting ready to retire, so we could like find a job for her to lead the way and educate other communities about the mental health approach, because it's critical that the team of mental health professionals are also not just educated but supported because of the level of trauma and victimization that they're learning about and hearing and taking in. In order to make that job sustainable for them, they really need a strong, supportive network themselves. And I think Susan is the lead expert in that right now.
Well, thank you. Well, let me, in summation, let me just thank our panelists for helping us to understand not only the challenges coming forward, but also the important work that are being done out in the community today, and especially we want to thank my Human Trafficking Congressional Advisory Committee for their input. As we go forward, we're going to be working with members of the panel, members of the community to try to strengthen legislation. I want to thank my committee members who are here as well. This will be a committee product, and so we thank them for their participation. And out there in the audience, we thank the members of the community that came forward in order to hear more about this issue, to be involved, and we appreciate the activism from so many who are supporting some of the community groups that are dealing with the survivors, those who were involved in these situations of sexual slavery, children that were pressed into this, or for those overseas who have been trafficked with respect to labor trafficking. And lastly, Ambassador DeBaca, thank you very much to you, Cedar DeBaca, for coming out, and I shall share with you all that today's video and testimony and legislative info are available online at foreignaffairs.house.gov for government. Thank you very much. We stand adjourned.